Okay, welcome back. We are here with more novel boot camp here on WordCamp. This is the boot camp that's taking you from idea to finished draft by the end of the year. And we lost a student already. Somebody just left the file. Welcome back. Okay. So we are on week 4. This is ultimately let me see if there we go. This is ultimately a 12-week program. So this is going to the end of the year. So that means that there's quite a bit of time left for you to get your pages in. Hopefully keeping up with those word count goals and being consistent and keeping your momentum and motivation high. So we will check in on your progress today. And today is all about dialogue. So we'll be looking at different techniques and snippets of dialogue from different styles and different types of books, looking at all the applications and pros and cons of different tactics there. You can join any of these other boot camps that are still going on. I don't recommend usually doing more than one boot camp at a time. In all the many 4 years that we've run these, I don't think anyone has ever finished their scripts when writing multiple scripts at a time. We always warn everyone and say, try to focus on one thing, finish that first, then move on to the next one. But if you find it's useful to jump back and forth between multiple projects, you totally can, or you can always just attend the other classes if you want to. The time slots are Friday, 6 to 8, Sunday, 11 to 1, and Saturday, 12 to 2 here on WordCamp for novels. I also run game design Wednesdays, 12 to 1 on Game Camp. So if you sign up for these classes, you'll finish the feature by December 21st, TV pilot by December 19th, and novel by December 6th. We'll be wrapping all of the boot camps up by the end of the year. Typically, we have a little time off around the Thanksgiving as well, because there's a holiday right there. So expect at least 1 week off around the 24th, 25th of November. And then we will often have the full week off of events around Christmas too. Okay, so we are on dialogue this week. The wrong one is highlighted there. Imagine this is the highlighted one. Ooh, now we don't have to imagine. Now I just did it live in real time. That one will be transparent. There we go. So this week is dialogue. Next week, suspense. Week after that, subplots, character arcs, action and set pieces, mood, tone, and genre, plot twist, mystery, and suspense. Pressure cooker, which is latter half of Act 2, moving into Act 3. And then wrapping up with endings, self-editing, and revising techniques with the first draft finished by December 6th, as I mentioned. Okay, so let's do our updates. You can tell us about the book that you're working on. Tell us how's the progress, any hurdles or creative blocks or any issues that you're hitting that we can maybe resolve today, hopefully. And then if you want to share a character introduction from the text of your book, you can do that in the text channel of our class today. We can take a look if you want feedback or just want to share. All right, so let's get started by going down our list and hear your progress updates. Dakota, why don't you start us off? Are you there? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Joyce. No, we cannot hear you, Dakota. Maybe I heard you a minute ago though, so maybe like a mic got unplugged or something like that. Maybe you toggled push to talk mode. We'll come back to you in a minute. Let's hear from Joyce for now.
I actually had a pretty good week. I think I got right at 4,000 words. I know my goal is 5, but I feel pretty good about it. I do want to do the lab. I think it's before this class because I am kind of going through my chapters. I found a bunch of procedural issues and maybe even some continuity issues within the first one. And I kind of want to solve those now before I kind of go deeper into the chapters. Is that lab after this class, or is that advanced lab, or what?
So there's 2 labs a week that I run. There's Friday, 12 to 2, and that was yesterday. And then there's today from 4 to 6. So it's 2 hours after this class wraps up.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the update.
Okay.
Glad you're making some progress, even though you're finding some issues and things to correct and fix along the way. Anything you've been reading that you want to share?
I'm actually reading a book about channeling because my characters channel. So it's actually, a person who's actually a channeler. It's called The Future Human. And so it's maybe 10 chapters into it, just to kind of get some authenticity of how my character channels.
Great. Okay, some research. Good idea. Thank you for that. Let's check back in with Dakota, see if it's working now.
Testing, testing, one,
Yeah,
two, three.
that works great.
What do you hear?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Old computer, everybody. Sorry. Anyway, things are going well. I'm keeping a nice pace. I'm a little bit behind on word count, but I do think I can catch up and will. I'm just now getting into chapter 3, so I'm hoping to uh finish that and then move into chapter 4. So I'm about a chapter behind, which isn't so terrible, I think. But I think the pace is going well for what I'm trying to do. Um, I think the major thing that I'm currently struggling with is the thing that we're talking about today, which is dialogue. Yay! And I think it's because I feel like that, and again, this is first draft, so I'm not expecting everything to be wonderful and great or anything. I'm actually expecting it to be terrible. Uh, but at the same time, uh, I'm struggling with uh, I feel like that my main character is a little too dry in places. He's a lawyer, and I'm trying to avoid having him, opine about, the legal procedure and all that, stuff. And like that isn't, you know, like he isn't constantly on, and that's kind of been the struggle at the moment. But I think that once I get him to another place that is not, the place that he normally is, it'll be a lot better. So that is currently the hope. But yeah, my dialogue is not not my favorite thing at the moment. But that's okay. It doesn't have to be for first draft. That's fine.
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
not, yeah, it doesn't have to be.
It would be
That's
crazy if you could
okay.
write great stuff right out of the gate, just with
Sure.
no editing at
Sure.
all.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I mean, yeah.
and something else is that like if your character has kind of a dry personality on the exterior, something I found like in novels in particular, it can work great if they have like a really interesting rich inner voice. So if
Mhm.
even if like they never say more than a few words, you can even imagine a character like Mad Max or someone like that might have like a lot of thoughts going on, which kind of like feel like dialogue the way that they play out in the book, but they just don't articulate all that much. That's why like kind of stoic, quiet characters can work really, or like analytical kind of characters can work really well in a
Mhm.
novel.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm kind of banking on right now is his inner voice is very witty and very very fun. So I'm just really enjoying that, but he's kind of the opposite whenever he speaks. So
Okay.
that's been that's been kind of fun.
Yeah, you can lean into that. That can be a defining part of the character, especially if he reflects on that somehow. Like he's like, I wish I could was better at speaking, or I wish I was better at articulating or saying what I feel or looking professional or any of those things, right? That conflict can be at the core, it can rest at the core of their character and can provide you interesting drama that lasts all throughout the book. Not it might be reflective of something else going on with them. Like I struggle to connect with people, or I struggle to control my emotions or something like that. So yeah, the way that they communicate and interface with others might be like a really core important aspect of their character too. So if you find that that keeps coming up and if it feels like a flaw in the writing, maybe just lean into it and make that like the point.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good point there. I like that. Sweet. Thank
Yeah, it
you.
might work great, especially for a lawyer who are expected to be
Yeah.
very good communicators, but they're not always by default. And like sometimes the
Sure.
people that are supposed to be the best at communicating, like college professors and things like this, really struggle
Mhm.
to communicate certain concepts, whether it's because they don't know how to moderate or like curate that knowledge or information, or they dump it way too fast, or they're just not a good public speaker, or any number of reasons.
And he's that too. So that's even
There you go.
that's even better.
Yeah. So yeah, big struggle. Big could be a big conflict for him there.
For sure.
Thank you for that. Let's hear from Lou.
Hello. Sorry. Well, but yeah. So I think my problem might be a little bit like the opposite to Dakota's, where I think like, I have the dialogue, but I struggle like integrating that into like good narration. Um, so I have like, I think I have like all the dialogue planned out for this book. It's just like adding in the narration that's perfect. Um, so yeah, that's been where I'm at. I'm like trying to add narration to the next scene that I'm working on. And yeah, that always takes me a long time. So I've been working on that for 2 weeks now. So I'm a little bit time tested, but it's I feel like it's still good progress for me. Usually I just would not I would be procrastinating right now. So at least like, checking in with you guys has helped me like focus a little bit.
Great. Yeah, that's part of what we're trying to, I mean, for some members, that's like the majority of why they sign up is just to have any kind of deadlines, structure, or motivation to just write the next sequence or chapter. So if that's helping, then I think it's working.
Yeah, yeah. So that has been very helpful.
Great. All right. Thank you, Lou. And yeah, I from myself started in playwriting. So the like dialogue first is usually how I started out approaching scenes and chapters as well. But get the more of this that you do, the more of different types of mediums that you try to write in, then the more you will have to build out kind of all of the different skills, which is why I recommend at least trying one of everything: novel, screenplay, stage play, maybe even audio or podcast or something like that, which can be really, really just almost entirely dialogue. So maybe there's other mediums that would suit the that style of writing better, or maybe just by branching out, you can learn those other skills.
Yeah, I kind of want to like move myself into, actually writing books. That's kind of the format. I mean, I feel, I actually started out, in a screenwriting class, like writing screenplays, but I, I'd really like to be able to, become a better writer and actually write books.
Great.
That would be nice.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, good idea. These days, it is uh, a better idea to learn how to write books than to get into screenwriting. Industry is not doing well. Okay, let's hear from Megan. How's your project going?
Really well. I'm thinking about lowering the age of the protagonist down to 20 so that I can do YA crossover with it. It lends itself to that really well, so I'm thinking I may as well do that. So rather than having her coming out for a job, she's coming out for an internship.
Okay, which book is this? This is the renovator who's working on the old house. That's right. Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. Okay, yeah, and 20. I mean, for most traditional agents, they view that category as new adults. So maybe you could even query it as that if you wanted to.
Yeah, I could query it as that. I can query it as YA crossover. So, or over YA, any of those sort of. Some people are calling it YA crossover now, God knows. They change them to what things are every 15 minutes.
Sure. Okay. Well, how would you say your percent, like what percent done are you? How much longer do you think you'll be working on it?
I'm still working on the boss fight. I just can't seem to get past this boss fight. As soon as I get past this boss fight, it should breeze out. But I'm 2/3 of the way through. Maybe
Oh, 2/3.
quarters away. Probably 3/4 through. So
Great. All right. Just stuck in the last. I guess this is your boss fight, so to speak. Is this last scene? So yeah. Once you crack that,
yeah, I've been fighting for a while. So.
all good.
But yeah, I'm at over 50,000 words.
Great.
We have reached novel.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right. Thank you for the updates. Sounds like some good progress. Okay. Is everyone ready to write their next chapter? It sounds like Megan, you're a little bit stuck. Is there some question you want to ask or something we can kind of help with now, or do you think it's just a matter of attacking the problem head
I
on?
think it's a matter of getting my gears moving. I wrote a few sentences. It wasn't really moving, so I flipped back to editing an earlier chapter to make it to change the age up a little bit and see if that's working. So
Okay.
that's basically all I've done. Yeah, I just need to sit down and do it, and it just doesn't seem to be flowing yet. It will, I'm sure, sometime.
Okay. All good. Anyone else have like a question or problem that they're getting stuck on that they feel they can't make any progress until they answer this question, or something that we can just help with right now?
How do you avoid saying, like, making your dialogue just be like, he said, she said, he said, she said? Like,
Good
is
question.
it advisable to change up the word said? Or,
So good question. Generally, no. Generally, that is considered the best practice, the best way to do it. But the craft of it, and we have a few slides on this today, so I won't get way too into it now, but don't worry, we will address that. The real skill of writing dialogue in books is using mostly said, but still not having it feel like you're just repeating the same dialogue attribution again and again, because you don't always even need a dialogue attribution. Once we know who's talking, you can just write the dialogue on its own, and then you alternate to the other speaker, and you don't need an attribution again at all if we know who is speaking. So a combination of that and beats of action, you can do things like, he picked up the tray. Hello. She opened the door. Not you again. That's kind of telling us who's speaking by giving us an action that they're also doing at that time, that you don't even need to use said at all if you just make careful use of those. And the skill and the craft of writing novel dialogue is some combination of all those things. Using said, using just lines that stand on their own because we already know who the speaker is, sort of like implicit attribution tags. And then we have action beats, which can space out and also help us identify who's speaking. But don't do them too much. You don't want to do too much of any one of those things because that can just like skew the dialogue in a direction you don't want it to. It might start feeling too slow, too halting. If there's an action beat in every single line, it starts to feel like your characters are trudging through mud in the scene. So yeah, it's a combination of those three things, and we'll look at a bunch of examples that should clarify it further.
okay.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else question they want to ask before we dive in? Okay, so we will, oh, go ahead. Does somebody have a question?
Oh, sorry, I was having a hard time getting my mic off. Hey, so along the lines of kind of mixing up the he said and, Nick scratched his head kind of thing.
Mhm.
Can you also, so you're not slowing it down with Nick scratched his head, can you say Nick said and Katie said when you've got like 5 people talking? So,
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of mixing it all together, or do you usually not say the person's name said?
No, you often need to, especially if there's more than 2 speakers. The more speakers you have, the more explicit dialogue attribution you need to use in order for us to keep it straight. But it can always be drawing from a combination of regular attribution, like said, or sometimes you can even use shouted, whispered, confessed, those kind of other words that might speak to the tone or the intent of the line. You can use those sometimes. Just don't way overdo it, or else it'll start feeling like a bad, middle grade book from the 90s. So yeah, some combination of those. And then sometimes, yeah, just say the character said. Or there's even times where you might want to use said the character. No, said Jeff. Which the order doesn't matter. Grammatically, it's exactly the same. Some authors and writing style guides suggest that said the character evokes like fairy tale or more childish style writing. But it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to at all. So I wouldn't take that as gospel, but usually it's the other way around. So yeah, you can absolutely just drop a character said as a tag if you need to. Often you will need to.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks for the question. Since these are dialogue questions, we might as well just get into the meat of the class today. So we are starting with good and bad dialogue, prose dialogue overview, stylized versus naturalistic, transition from summary into dialogue and the other way around, subtext, novelistic techniques, common issues, some tips for improvement, and then ending with our workshop period. Okay, so hopefully you guys are all making your word count goals. We checked in with everyone. It seems like everyone's making progress of a kind and at least knows where they are or knows what the problem is if something is holding you back. Hopefully we're also reading and consistently reading so that every week we can ask, what have you read lately? And you can share whatever awesome stuff it is, whether it's a script, a teleplay, or a novel. Welcome, Nacho. Just so you know, we are out of cloud storage recording space again, so I'm just having to record this right to my PC at the moment. Hopefully I have enough room for it. Check how much space I have. I didn't even look. I have 7 gigs. All right. So I think this should
You
be
guys got 7 gigs to
yeah.
finish your novels. Let's go.
7 gigs of gold, Jerry. Gold. All right. So let's start with this question. What do we want to improve? I think a few folks even mentioned they're working on specifically looking at improving their dialogue today. What are some of those problems that you've encountered? I mean, maybe we'll just recap one that Dakota mentioned in the preface to this class, which your character feels sort of dry. Does anybody else have a specific issue with dialogue that they're trying to diagnose or improve on, kind of like that?
I think I guess my thing that I kind of struggle with is making each character's voice so unique enough to know who's talking without actually. I mean, I know you still have the, he said, she said kind of thing, but you still kind of want them to have their voice without making them like a personality so different or quirky, or you know what I mean? Like, 'cause
Sure.
not everybody that you hang around with is like the opposite of you. I mean, you clearly want characters that are the opposite of you so you can kind of learn from them and grow from them. But, there are times where you guys are very similar because you're best friends or something. So how do I distinguish that type of voice?
Yeah, distinctifying between different voices is really important. And you're right that sometimes characters just talk similarly. You can't always have everybody have an eye patch and a parrot on the shoulder and like a million things that sets them apart and makes them just immediately clear. There's techniques that you can use, such as dialect, turns of phrase, vocabulary, intelligence level, or we could say education level, culture. All those things might give you some clues, and those in combination with the character personality. Like some people are more terse, some are more direct, whereas some use more subtext and implications. So you have to factor in both culture and implication and communication style and things like that. But it's tough. Yeah, sometimes you don't have to distinguish way too much, and we just get that they're separate characters and it's fine. You don't always have to like hammer it home super hard in every single scene, especially if your characters are just similar people. They just come from the same background, they're the same age, they are friends. You might rely on something else to communicate the distinction between them. Maybe it's the action, the body language, or other things the characters are doing in the scene. You may not always need to use dialogue as the primary delineator between characters on a page by page basis. It doesn't always have to be night and day like you're picking up on here. But yeah, sometimes the little things are the things that stand out more. Look for like phrases that your character falls back on, or like styles of thought or communication where like you have those some characters that will always say exactly what they mean, and you have some characters that will kind of talk around what they mean, or just sort of suggest what they want to do, right? Like I heard a bar opened up in town this week, or I heard this awesome new bar opened up in town. Or they say there's a plate of muffins on the counter, and there's like an implied meaning to that. Whereas some characters might say, I made the best muffins that anyone's ever made in my entire life, in their entire life, and I demand that you eat one now and try it and tell me how it is. It's kind of two different ways of achieving the same goal. So yeah, I would look for more like tactics than adding on hat after hat after hat in terms of distinctifying the language itself. Tactics and communication styles. But good, that's a great thing to be working on and improving. Go ahead, Nasha.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, the way that you sort of illustrated those examples, it's sort of like, I mean, you're drawing out your inner actor in a sense, right? Like, I mean, at least, as you were illustrating those, like, it's almost like you just inhabited 2 different characters, right? And so much of like a character is like the way they talk, the way they, so yeah, I guess it's sort of like, we're maybe think about it as if you were playing the character can help
Sure.
sometimes to
Yeah, that's
think
great.
of a different way to talk. Yeah.
Absolutely. I often am suggesting utilizing these actor-focused theater techniques called bookwork before which actors will do where they will write down the motivation for every single line and action, and they will say what is the intention of that to intimidate, to seek comfort, to confuse, to obscure. You know, they will write, sometimes it's sort of abstract, but it's like one verb for each particular line or a thing the character does so they know what is motivating that and what in the moment is driving that. Where is that coming from? And yeah, these are narrative techniques that actors are often using, but we, the writer, have to take the part of every single actor in our story. And we can't lean on the fact that there will be a casting director that will cast all these amazing, attractive actors that the audience will be able to look at and distinguish. Oh, I obviously know that was Tom Cruise who said that. And that was Henry Cavill who said that. And that was, I don't know, Joseph Gordon-Levitt who said that. There we go. Everyone's three favorite actors. And also we don't want to over rely on explaining everything the characters are doing so as to suggest like he said this with really ostentatious hand gestures and then he widened his eyes and he smiled and he showed 12 teeth when he smiled. Something like that might even sound a little creepy how you're sort of over explaining like the body language of it. So you want to resist that urge to explain too much or to talk around the dialogue to the point where you're like hitting the same point home again and again, or to have the characters restate the same thing again and again. Did anybody see Madam Web from like 3 or 4 years ago, the Marvel movie with Dakota Johnson as the lead? I just saw it on Netflix this last weekend. It has terrible reviews. I knew I was in for a real treat, but it's the movie I've seen where the characters repeat the same information the most of any well, I'm doing it myself. The most of any movie I've ever seen. They'll be like, somebody will say like the spiders are the power source, and somebody will be like the spiders. Somebody else would go, yeah, they're the source of the power. And somebody else would go, oh, so if we cut off this access to the spiders, and somebody else will say, then they lose access to the power. It's kind of like the spiders are the source of the power. It's like every conversation is like that. The character will say something, somebody else will like confirm it, somebody else will question it, then somebody else will reaffirm that confirmation. So we have like 4 versions of every single line. Almost every conversation is just characters. Maybe this is just segueing into our what is like bad dialogue kind of topic here. But almost every line is characters explaining backstory, motivations, or what's going on. Very little of it is characters actually feeling like they're authentically reacting in that moment. So if you want to learn all about that dialogue, check out Sony Pictures, Madam Web, only on Netflix, and soon to be Tubi and other various schlock streaming sites, I'm sure. I haven't even watched Morbius yet. Just wait. Just wait until I enter my Morbin era. Okay, what else? What else about, yeah, bad dialogue? What do you guys think? What makes bad dialogue? You don't have to call out anyone in particular. Like, I don't want to spend too much time just hating on any particular media, as fun as it is to dunk on Madam Web, but it's just not that fun to hate stuff, I find. You can draw examples from stuff you've seen if you want to, but like, let's not put the focus on I hate this. Let's just talk about bad dialogue. What do you guys think makes dialogue that is ineffective? Or maybe if you're drawing from an example, what makes that example ineffective?
Exposition and stating the obvious. I call it the 1930s radio program problem, where a character be like, golly gee, it sure is raining hard today. I better get my raincoat for all the tasks I'm about to do. And then he lists the tasks that he's about to do and describes himself getting dressed. Don't ever do that stuff.
Yeah, this is traditions that came about in the radio drama kind of practice, which means that the audience have no visual cues at all. And in the badly written, I mean, there are well-written audio dramas too that don't do this, but in the badly written ones, they have the characters just state what is going on around them in a way that no dialogue should be doing that. Sometimes they would do voiceovers though, which that can make a little more sense if it's like the character's thoughts, which, something to manage. You don't want to have characters talking to themselves too much usually, but it can fit within certain styles and traditions. Somebody else.
Yeah, I think, just making sure you're not being boring by giving the reader the same information over and over again are your concern. So each dialogue bit needs to tell them something new or something interesting. And in addition to that, it's also really interesting if you have dialogue that isn't like there are 2 layers, like what's actually going on and what the dialogue is saying. And so there's probably like a technical word to subtext or whatever.
Subtext, yeah.
Yeah, but that can be really interesting because the reader knows like this subtext and they're really interested in that and they like to see how the dialogue interacts with that without entirely addressing it. It can always be entertaining too. Like say the character's secret or something intriguing. actually move dialogue along.
Yeah, great idea. So subtext can create an additional layer to scenes. That sometimes it's a big part of the fun of a scene is we know what is happening on the surface, and then we can tell that something else is going on in terms of the interaction between the people involved. And if you're using a lot of that for your story, it sort of earns you these big moments where your characters just need to sort of break that and say exactly what they mean. And that can make them feel even more authentic and even stronger and more impactful. If most of the time everyone's talking just below the surface, then your story builds up to these moments where it all breaks loose and people just need to be really direct. That can work really, really well.
I have a question. So how do you sort of balance between something that you feel like you really need to set up, like people are missing it or something, versus like, what I call like the meeting scene, like so in the show The Outsider, they keep talking about, oh, we're gonna have this meeting, are you ready for the meeting? Oh, I'm not sure if I'm ready. Like what, you know what I'm saying? You're kind of building anticipation for something, but sometimes it's like too much, like you know what I'm saying? Or you're worried that people might get you're trying to make something seem significant sometimes through setting it up through dialogue, but sometimes it just comes off as like it's like, why is everybody talking about this thing?
Yeah, that could be an issue. If you have overstated the importance of something or have it come up too many times, then it might seem to build importance that's not really there. So that can be worth cutting down on if you're finding that your beta readers are like, wait, what, doesn't that thing matter? Didn't we make a big deal out of this? And then later it turns out to not be a big deal. Yeah, those can be huge problems that might rise up in dialogue, but that can come up in many different ways throughout the script. And it can seem like a big plot hole, or it can seem like it raises big plot holes if you're like, why did we talk about the tournament so much? And then the tournament passed in like 2 lines and no one seems to care about the repercussions of the tournament or something like that. Or even in, I know I said that we don't want to focus way too much on specific examples. I like the movie overall, but the recent Superman movie had a great exchange between Superman and Lois about the delicate political situation of superheroes and intervening in foreign wars. And how like you can't just go and save people just to save people. Like you have to like check with all the powers that have treaties with that country. And like the argument made sense. But then at the end of the movie, one of the good characters just kills the leader of a foreign nation, basically. And it's portrayed as, hell yeah, we did it. Good job, team. And we just end the movie like pretty shortly afterwards. Didn't we say it was a huge deal? Didn't we have a whole really, really impactful scene about how superheroes can't just be intervening in foreign conflicts, but then they just do and it's fine and no one cares? What? So yeah, if you overstate the importance of something or you like seem to set a rule and then you seem to break the rule that you set, that can lead to your readers being like, what on earth? And it was at the end of the story, so it didn't matter that much. Like, I don't think anyone, like, I might have been the only audience member that really cared that much about that. But it just seemed to counteract or contradict what was set up early on.
I guess, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Like, another thing you can do is like, if your return on investment for a setup isn't good enough, it requires like a little bit of inspiration, but you can tighten the stakes or you can complicate it in the second act so that, maybe you're just missing that additional level of risk. And once you add that, then the, reader will be satisfied. You just need to, if it's important, you can make it more by adding.
Sure. Yeah, you can restate or have your characters recap or focus on something if you want to really state how important it is, as long as you're not recapping it ad infinitum till we're all bored of hearing it like Madam Web. Luke says I can barely hear Lou. Yeah, I have Lou's volume turned all the way up and it's still pretty fuzzy for me. You might want to try a different device if you can. I think I'm hearing most of it. It's just a little tough.
There's
Are there any just a follow-up to this, are there any like maybe techniques or sort of craft things you
I
can
have
do
one.
where if you feel like you really need to set up this meeting or whatever it is, but you want it to feel like maybe as part of a conflict between the characters in the dialogue or just something so it doesn't feel like just exposition-y, as you know.
I have one. Show the characters feeling something and ask the question, why do the characters feel this way? And answer it with, oh, well, like in Office Space, these consultants are coming, and that means they're going to fire a bunch of people. So that's why everyone's worried. Or There's a Malcolm in the Middle one I really like. Like the neighborhood's really excited that they're going on vacation. It's like, okay, well, they're happy to be rid of them, but they're really excited because every year they go on vacation, they throw a block party, and it's this big thing. So it's a little like, I don't know, extra. It has a layer of mystery that I like. You can kind of like peel it back and like, oh, the people are feeling this way because of this event that is about to happen.
Thank you for that. I kind of forgot what the question was. Did that answer the question, or can you remind me what the question was? If you're
Oh,
still there.
just so when people are, you need to set something up. So you've got to set up this meeting or whatever the exposition thing is, but like maybe some craft techniques so it doesn't it's still interesting at least, or intriguing, maybe there's conflict in the scene where the character is explaining something and the other person disagrees with them or something, just so like, like, oh, I really need to set this up, but it's like the way I'm doing it now, it seems, like just boring. Like,
Oh, sure.
does that make sense? So, yeah.
Yeah, just how to make exposition more interesting. Yeah, you can always have something else going on in the scene, some other dynamic that we're tracking, some other goal that your character is attempting to pursue, some distraction, or some obstacle or impediment that's in the room with them. You can think carefully where my scene is actually set and how that might affect the style of communication the characters have to take or the particular challenges they might be facing in playing out that conversation. The example of, they're in the library, so they have to whisper, or they're in the middle of a car chase, so they have to not only deliver the exposition or like figure something out amongst themselves, they have to also be avoiding the bad guy the entire time. The first Terminator movie is often one that I bring up. I know it's a novel class, but in terms of features, there's a ton of just the characters talking about it's a robot from the future. It's coming to kill you because you're this, because you're important, because you'll eventually do this. Like we have so much of that to set up, but every time that we need to get into that, there's something else important going on in the scene too. Either they have to be quiet because they're hiding in the car in a parking garage as the bad guy's looking for them, so they need to really keep it down. Or we have one character that's being interrogated by the police as he's delivering some of this information. Or there's another part where the characters are literally being chased, running for their lives as they're having to communicate this. Or there's a part where Sarah is having to heal some of Kyle's injuries, and she's like, keep talking, stay awake, tell me this, tell me this. And so we're always sort of weaponizing that exposition as like a tactic in a conversation, either that or finding something else interesting for the characters to be doing at the same time that complicates or is complicated by the interaction. Hope that gives you some ideas there.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. Some common issues, I think we've touched on a few of these. The on the nose idea, interchangeable character voices are what Joyce was talking about in terms of differentiating between the different characters. Lack of subtext is just characters saying exactly what they mean, like we just stride into a room. I'm really upset because I think that you're cheating on me. I'm not cheating on you. Well, I suspect that you are. This marriage is over. Well, I'm upset. I'm upset too. They both walk out. Is that how people really communicate? Not exactly. Like, that's sort of like a summary of what happens there. But if it feels more like a summary of what's going on than the actual lines that people would say, it's not going to feel that realistic. Sometimes you can use summary, and sometimes it's better to summarize rather than playing out the full scene. When you're in a book, sometimes we're in a scene and sometimes we're not. It's not like a movie or a play where we're always in a scene. There's only scenes. You have no choice but to be in a scene in a movie or a play, with some exceptions, like in terms of soliloquies or interludes or things like that on stage. But in a movie or show, you're always in a scene. It's either a conflict or a discovery scene. In a book, we are either in a conflict or discovery scene, or we're kind of like floating or transitioning from one type of scene to another, which that could we might digress for quite a while. Like we may kind of drift away from the story for the author to speak about something else or to analyze the themes of what's been going on so far in certain types of storytelling. Certain metafiction might be doing that, right? So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff you can do here. It's a very, very broad palette that you can draw from in writing novelistic interactions, dialogue, and just chapters. So we try to avoid some of these issues and we try to gravitate towards the ones that make the writing stronger, but there's not one size fits all that's going to make it work every time. You try to cut down on filler or small talk and also filter phrases like he felt sad and things like this. You often don't need to say that you don't need to include an additional word such as like felt. because a lot of the time you can give us something that your character is doing that showcases how they're feeling rather than having to tell us how they're feeling. I think we hear this term show don't tell too much, so much that I try not to even say it. We don't want to use too many adverbs, which is kind of seen as over-explaining sometimes. And often just this, a lot of authors or a lot of style analysts and teachers will just write things like, avoid the urge to over-explain. I think I have a book right here that talks about that. Which one was it? So I think it is in this one, Writing 21st Century Fiction by Donald Mass. Let's hear a little bit from this book. I'm just going to read it out loud from the text so I don't have it up on the screen. Sorry about that. But talking about avoiding the temptation to over-explain. I think this is the right part. One second. Let me just double check my other one to make sure it's not this one instead. Okay, so in this one, it is speaking, this is actually different, and it's self-editing for fiction writers, different book. This one is by Rennie Brown and Dave King. So in this one, it's talking about this idea of a character saying you can't be serious, right? You can't be serious is pretty much communicating one type of thought. It could be disbelief, right? You can't be serious, or maybe even frustration. There's a bit of different emotions woven in there. But if he writes a line like, you can't be serious, she said in astonishment, you might be kind of hitting the same point twice. It's kind of like the over-explaining with the adverb kind of idea. If you're like most beginning novelists or short story writers, you write sentences like these sometimes almost without thinking, the authors of this book even tell us. What could be easier than simply to tell your readers how the character feels? If she's astonished, you just say so. It saves all sorts of time and trouble, but it's also considered lazy writing. When your dialogue is well written, describing your character's emotions to your readers is just as patronizing as a playwright running onto the stage and explaining to the audience, you can't be serious conveys astonishment. No explanation is needed. And when you explain dialogue that needs no explanation, you are writing down to your readers a surefire way to turn them off. The theatergoer might or might not walk out of the theater when the playwright runs on stage to explain, but the reader who feels patronized is likely to close the book. Resist the urge to explain. RUE is the acronym or initialism that these authors are using here. And if your dialogue isn't well written, if it needs the explanation to convey those emotions, then the explanation won't really help. Say you'd written, I find that difficult to accept, she said in astonishment. Well, here the explanation does let your readers know that your character is astonished, but sometimes we don't want them to know that fact. We want them to feel the emotion of it. You want the readers to be astonished as the character is, and the only way to do that is to have her say something the reader can imagine themselves saying when they are astonished. I find that difficult to accept doesn't quite do it. Maybe it feels a bit too reserved or clinical or distant, right? Somebody who's truly astonished might not be able to phrase things in such clear-cut terms, unless that's like a defining point of your character, right? Okay, so that's just a few passages from this book here. Again, self-editing for fiction writers. I think there's some good ideas in there, and resist the urge to explain, or maybe we'll say to over-explain. It's just a good principle to come back to. We don't need to use, in different forms of over-explaining might be the adverbs. It might be saying, she said this in astonishment. I'm so glad you're here, he said out of happiness that his children have returned home. It's like, sometimes the sentiment or the words can stand entirely on their own. Okay, let's look at some ideas of good dialogue. What do you guys think makes really great dialogue in a book?
I think that dialogue has to not only propel the story forward, but also progress the character forward as well. You know, Victor Hugo was great at this. You know, he often opined a lot, but every single line of dialogue that he uses in Hunchback, for example, especially when it comes to Quasimodo, reveals something about Quasimodo that we did not learn before. And it also helps Quasimodo understand something that he didn't know about himself. So it does two things. Dialogue should do more than one thing, right? And I think that propelling story and character simultaneously are two very good things to do.
Great. Yep, good ideas there. So we can look at, if we're talking about propelling or advancing character, we're usually talking about moving the character down their arc, which is going to be a way of tracking their emotional progression and a progression of their choices. So it is looking at who are they at this point in the story and how are they changing or developing by the end. So who do they start as? What choices do they make, and how do they change? And so dialogue, yeah, it's moving, it's advancing the plot forward, but it's also moving characters down their arcs, changing them into who they need to be by the end.
I think great dialogue has to do with characters trying to get something. They're using tactics, they're avoiding certain words for certain reasons, they're emphasizing other words for other reasons. And that makes it way more believable. They're using their words as a tool to try to get the thing that they want out of the conversation. All characters.
Great. Yeah, so dialogue needs to be motivated and has a point behind it and a goal. It's part of a tactic. Nobody talks just for no reason at all. Even if somebody does talk for no reason at all, it's for a reason, to fill the space, to fill the silence, to be comforted, right? Like even small talk has a purpose behind it, to get to know somebody, to assess if I can trust somebody, to see if someone checks out, right? Like all these things might just be the objective of small talk, which is this is what actors are doing when they're marking up their script and book work. Even a line like "hi" might have a motivation next to it that kind of clarifies, well, what are they really getting at? Like what is the overall intention of the interaction, and how do we start to set that up? Like your high might be to disarm or sort of build trust for yourself. The high might be to intimidate. It might be to disconcert somebody. You can have a million different reasons you say hi. Anyone else?
Just, I think there's something big where, you're watching, let's say, a scene of a play, or you're reading a play, or you're reading, just sometimes in great novel dialogue as well. Some of it's like, writers like Cormac McCarthy, No Country for Old Men. But there's dialogue that there's something else underneath this, something else going on. There's some other, meaning that it just like you're watching it or you're reading it and it just suddenly like clicks like, oh, that's what they're talking about. That is such a cool feeling when you're reading dialogue like that, or that reframes. You thought they were talking about one thing and then it's actually like, oh, they're actually talking about the dead body in this other room.
Sure. Yeah, something else going on in the conversation, some additional context that reframes what we've seen before, or we understand the meaning of the interaction differently at the end, essentially. Those can all be a hallmark of a great scene. Go ahead.
And the rhythm of the conversation, it's just sometimes there's just, it just flows. The characters might be playing sort of games with each other or something.
Right. So I think we covered a couple of these. Does somebody else have a comment? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, can you use dialogue too to kind of show that somebody's behavior isn't consistent with the words they're using? So that there's some trust issues because what they're saying is it congruent with, something they just did or their body language or something another character knows to be true, but it's
Sure.
kind of the opposite of what they just heard.
Yeah, this would be dependent on your POV. If we are in the POV of another character that's perceiving somebody else and seeing, hey, they're acting kind of funny, you can just comment on that or have them think, that doesn't quite seem like what he said a minute ago, right? Like you can have whoever's perceiving the scene notice that themselves. But if it's your character POV that is the one that is sort of acting unreliable in a way, they may not realize it. And so you may not have to call it out. Thinking of, books like American Psycho and things like this, where the character's sanity or perception is in question, often the things they're saying are completely different from what they're doing. And that's just part of the balance of writing an unreliable narrator character, if that is in fact your POV. But yeah, you can definitely, that's one of the main ways to showcase a character is either lying or hiding something or being deceptive in some kind of ways to show that mismatch between what they say and what they do. Thanks for that. So I think we covered a lot of these main points. We're propelling the story, we're revealing character, meaning we don't have to know exactly who your character is at the very start, but the more they talk and the more that we see scenes with them, the more we will learn about them in terms of, in terms of their backstory, in terms of their upbringing, culture, education, dialects, ability, whatever they can do, whatever their skill set is. We will be seeing more of them throughout the whole story. We are developing relationships, meaning that relationships are actually changing. A lot of the time when I'm doing editorial on novels, I will assess would if we had done nothing but have the characters make external progress in this part, and this particularly goes for like big adventure stories and epic fantasies and stuff like that. I'll read or I'll be doing editing on a novel where it's like, then the adventurers get to the jungle and they have to fight a bunch of bad guys here and they get the next gemstone they need for the next part of the quest. And well, my diagnostic assessment will often be if we did nothing but summarize that chapter and said they got the next gemstone, would anything be different for the story? Would anyone's opinion of anyone else have changed? You have to kind of be developing character the whole way through the book to the point, like, because that's just makes the story feel more believable and realistic because people's relationships are always sort of like modulating and changing, and we're moving down the characters' arcs as they make different choices and they become a different person by the end of the story a lot of the time. Not always. There's some characters that don't change, but a lot of characters do. So ask yourself in this scene, if we did nothing but the external action, if we did nothing but make progress towards the goal, or if that's the only thing that we accomplished, do I need to increase the shift in relationships between these characters in that sequence, add more conflict between them, or find something else for them to be interacting, talking about, learning about? Do we learn anything important about them? Do we sort of dig down deeper to the core of who any of them are? Did we advance any of them down an arc, and did we change any relationship? Those should be 4 big questions that you ask in assessing, should I just cut the whole sequence? Okay, I really like this. Well, KJ Parker is a master of dialogue, novelistic dialogue, I will say. I don't think he's had any movies or TV shows produced, except for maybe one this last year, which I'm not sure how much it sticks to the text. But he's really good at what we might even think of as kind of almost screenwritery playwright style dialogue. You see, it's very bare sometimes. We don't need much. Sometimes when we know who the speakers are, you can just let the lines stand on their own. Add a little context, the occasional attribution, and then allow the audience to remember the speakers and to sort of fill in the rest mentally. Here's an exchange between an exorcist and a demon from Prosper's Demon, which is about a sort of amoral exorcist. All right, here's how the scene goes. 5 long strides brought me up close enough. I looked in through the sides of the poor devil's head and caught its eye. It stared back at me, always the same expression, like a bad boy in your apple tree with half of one of your apples in his mouth. So he's literally looking inside someone's head and seeing a demon inside of them. I think he's using his magic sort of perception. You can't literally see like an average person would not be able to see the demon, but he has magic sight. You again, it said. Me, I replied. It looked so sad and wistful. Give me a break. Out, I said. I just got here. Tough. 5 minutes, all right? Just give me 5 minutes, then I'll be on my way. Out. Simple, right? We know who the speakers are. You don't need to overdo it with the tags. And once you establish, especially in a back and forth between 2 characters, when we know who the speakers are, when you've firmly established that well enough, you can write it like a play for a while. Just let the dialogue stand on its own with the occasional action be a reminder of who's speaking just in case we get lost. We had some questions on that at the start of the class today on dialogue attribution. I want to make sure that's super clear to everybody, how you can kind of allow a lot of lines to stand on their own. Does anyone have a question about that idea?
Lines that stand out on their own.
No, they stand on their own, not stand out. So stand on their own, meaning we don't need, don't need attribution, don't need to say any adverb or explanation. It's just dialogue.
What?
Go ahead.
Yeah,
I was just gonna.
curious. Go ahead, Nacho.
Oh no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'd just be curious to know like more techniques. Like I know a few easy ones, like using longer sentences versus shorter sentences, using more educated sounding language versus less educated sounding language. More tips that might make dialogue lines easily attributable to the character speaking them, if that makes sense. Like maybe a catchphrase, anything you can think of.
yeah, phrases they fall back on that can be, or placeholders that they use. Can get annoying if we read way too much of it, but might be a good distinctifier here and there. You can look at length of sentences, I think you mentioned a second ago. So just, or complexity of sentences. You might have some characters that are not even native speakers. And so their dialect may be informed by their native language in some way, or just their lack of fluency in the language. You have to be a little careful about that one, but there's lots of non-native speakers out there. You can look at or you can differentiate characters via, what else? What are some other, yeah, what else comes to mind, guys? What else do you think?
Maybe slang.
Sure, slang. Okay, so the toolbox of words that they are drawing from, more or less, or the way that they code switch in different areas, like different arenas of their life. You have the uptight military general who's forced to do daycare for the kids. Well, he's going to be still talking like the military general, but in a way that might be softened somewhat or modulated depending on who they're talking to.
Sort of in different emotional places in the scene.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. You can feature characters that are in a very different mood or mental states that might be able to,
Okay.
if you have some character that's terrified or just got out of a car wreck, they're barely able to even form full coherent sentences at that point. Everything's trailing off with dot, 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 or double dash. Meanwhile, you have the police officer that's trying to take their statement like, you need to calm down. I'm here to take your statement on what happened. That could be two very different emotional places that the characters could be coming from that would distinctify between them and would show up in the grammar and the punctuation.
Or maybe you have two very similar, like college students, but one of them's having a great day and the other's having a poor day, and that kind of reflects their emotional state. Could
Sure.
tell us who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can even see. We don't want to do way too much of it, but you might even just like look at the words that you're using and the attributions and think of how does that affect the mood or the tone of the conversation. If a character comes in and they're exhausted, then we might use completely different words for what they're doing, or the body language, the way they're holding themselves, I hope that makes sense. I heard somebody else speaking up a second ago. Go ahead. No, maybe I misheard.
Maybe it was me, I don't know. Just a question just about or something we see frequently in writers' voice submissions is sort of people combining actions with, like you mentioned about dialogue tags in a way that doesn't quite make sense. So it's like, you again, Sarah smiled and ran to this, or just some kind of weird action. And it like, maybe that might be helpful to kind of go over,
Sure. Okay, yeah. I know what you mean. So yeah, when you are picking a attribution word for speech like that, you can't. It is at least grammatically and like on a dictionary basis incorrect to say, "Thanks, she smiled." You don't smile words. Smiling is a facial expression. You can intone something, you can confess something, you can insist something. Those are sort of more like abstracted, like ways to speak to the intention or the mood behind that line, which can be really useful sometimes. Some readers and writers are like, don't do too much, don't do that at all. But I think I think it works great sometimes to, to have your character not just say something, but they what's like another, I already used confess too much. They apologize, or they whatever it is that just like adds a little bit of extra meaning behind what they're doing. It's meatloaf for dinner, he apologized. You see what I mean? Like that can kind of be a way of adding a little bit of richness to that line rather than restating the same thing. The difference is that you're adding nuance, you're not restating the line. I hope I'm still answering the same question. What question was I answering? I hope I'm on track.
Yeah, just sort of people sometimes, I think I don't know if it may not be like they're intentionally thinking that the person is smiling the words, but it's sort of like,
right.
How you have, for example, it looks so sad and wistful, and it could be just the writer is like mixing up how do you combine actions with dialogue but it ends up being a bit weird.
Yeah, that can happen. So you can, most of the time you just want to separate the thought, the action into a full thought on its own. So you're here, period. She smiled. Or you could go the other way around. She smiled, period. You're here would be a nice way of setting up, oh, who's about to speak, and then telling us who does the speaking. So just don't make them the same sentence. That would be the first suggestion I would make. And then in this one, we're in close third POV. So any line of narration or description we are assuming is sort of coming from the main character. Like that's their thought. That's his way of seeing things. We sort of imagine, I often explain it as they're in close third, the character is like the one writing the text. So any text that stands on its own, we might imagine as an expression of or an interpretation of their thoughts or their opinion of that thing. So yeah, I guess my main tip there is make them separate sentences if you're not sure. Don't use things that are not actually speaking to the delivery of the lines themselves as your dialogue attribution words. Maybe seeing more examples would be helpful with that one too. Okay. Good thoughts, guys. So we've got a couple different types of dialogue when it comes to novels. You've got external, which is in quotation marks and reflects your characters speaking aloud in the world. Then we have internal, which might reflect your characters thinking in close third, or if you're writing in first person, then the entirety of the book might just sort of be an expression of their voice, of them kind of, it might feel like they're extemporaneously telling the story, even if they're not, or even if there's no way that someone actually could be extemporaneously speaking for like, what, 30 hours to narrate the entire occurrences of the book. That's just part of the conceit. We imagine that the text of the work takes on an element of the diction of your narrator characters in third person. If you're an omniscient, then we have another character there, which is sort of like you, the author. It's sort of like the narrative itself has to have a sort of external voice that should remain more or less consistent. It might feel sort of weird if you swap between different omniscient narrators. Though I can think of some ways that might be a really cool thing to try. So if you have some way of doing that, like maybe a story like a story about ancient, set in ancient Greek mythology narrated by different gods, could be kind of cool way to swap between different omniscient narrators. Maybe I don't think the Greek gods are even omniscient, but you see what I mean. Something like that could kind of work. That might be cool. So prose dialogue is often interspersed with characters' reactions or reflections upon the spoken words of the concepts they're speaking about. And we are much more focused on the internal state of the characters than a movie or TV show would be. We can also use this idea called free indirect speech, where we are sort of substituting or we are utilizing lines of narration, action lines, that will kind of reflect the character's thoughts, or we understand that that is them that is articulating that in a way, or not articulating it, but they are thinking or feeling that thing. Like Jeff looked around the party, not bad, could use better music. So that's kind of, we are imagining that that's Jeff's thoughts in that paragraph. And you can even do that in omniscient. It's usually a little better to put the free direct speech in italics just to make sure that it's really clear. And then of course we can go into narrative summary, where you don't even need to clarify what is spoken at all. It's kind of dry and impersonal, but you don't always need to play out every scene. He smirked at Anna and told her the party wasn't so bad. We don't even know what the words were. We just know what happened. It's like a summary. It's a synopsis of the interaction. And we can use that to get just to the most important parts. Like you can say, they talked about this and that for a while until he decided it was time for the big confession. You never really need to play out every part of a conversation, just the good parts. Stylized dialogue is intentionally heightened in terms of language, rhythm, wit, funniness. Think of a sitcom. Most people aren't funny all the time. And if somebody is funny, like it's kind of weird that nobody ever laughs, right? Those are all just sort of conceits of the style. Stylization means that you're leaning into a particular, like an affect or affectation for the text that is deliberately not like real life. We know it's not. The goal is not to write something that's just like real life. Nobody thinks it's real life, and it's not pretending to be. The painting is not trying to convince you that it's not a painting. It's often what I tell people when they complain about bad special effects or things like that. I think I was watching RoboCop 2 and my mom was like, that doesn't look like a real robot. I was like, Mom, the paint, if you look up close, you can see brushstrokes in paintings, you realize, right? But that's because, is that because it's a bad painting that the artist messed up the water because you can see the brushstrokes? No, it's actually because the painting's not trying to convince you that it's not a painting. That didn't go over so well, as you might imagine. But I hope you get the idea. we're not trying to pretend that this is real. We know that it is a style, it is an affect, it is fake. We are going into it wanting to suspend our disbelief to the point where we believe that, okay, there is some sort of alternate dimension where these things happened or are currently happening, but ultimately we can separate that from real life, and we know that it is not going to be purely realistic. So it's okay to have your characters speak with flair or theatricality. You can write your book not like it's a real series of events, but write it like it's a Hong Kong action movie. Sure, it'd be weird if the characters talked in really realistic ways in certain genres. Within certain ones, it is the expectation, especially if you're attempting to deliberately ape the style of, let's say, Victorian, Regency, Edwardian style writers, where there's a lot of stylization and affect in the text. It's sort of the interaction styles in those books are kind of like how people wish they could interact, how articulate and deep and meaningful we all kind of aspire to be. It's an aspirational style of communication. In real life, we're not pretending that everyone in the 1800s was able to perfectly articulate their emotional state at all times. It's absolutely not the case. But in books, it's better to read it that way. It's more fun to read that in the same way that it's more fun to watch a Marvel movie dialogue than it is to watch people in an actual war really talking to each other. Especially when you consider how monotonous and obnoxious real life dialogue can be, especially in stressful situations. I brought this up a couple times in previous events, how I've been watching police chases and stuff like that on YouTube recently, and arrests footage and things like this, which you can just watch like body cam footage of certain states of various high stress scenarios. Real dialogue is not compelling for the most part. And certain times it becomes very compelling, and it occasionally resembles a movie for like a minute or two. But those are the sort of moments that we want our stories to entirely consist of, is like those best sort of moments of interaction. Whereas a lot of realistic dialogue from stressed out people is incredibly repetitive, annoying, and just not fun to listen to. So even if you're writing a naturalistic style, you could curate only really interesting scenes, but more naturalistic does not inherently mean more entertaining. And the goal of writing commercial fiction is to entertain. So we want to use stylized dialogue more when we're trying to establish some sort of specific tone, voice, or affect for the text. Like I mentioned, if you're writing in the style of blank, in the style of samurai movies, in the style of Jane Austen, something like this, then we want to stylize more. The world might be heightened, ironic, or different from ours, separate from ours in some kind of way. Or maybe the character's speech is a big part of the humor and the drama. You know, it's okay to have your character, if every line is funny, that's not particularly realistic, but if it's making the reader laugh in every scene, then it's working.
Do you have an example of quippy young adult?
An example of quippy young adult? Sure. You should check out the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir. Locked Tomb. Let me bring it up. This is a franchise that some people really bounce off of because of the hyper quippy, stylized kind of YA dialogue. The first book is Gideon the Ninth. I'll link it in the chat there, but this is kind of about space necromancers summoning armies of skeletons and zombies to kill each other and stuff like that. But the characters talk like modern tweens on TikTok, and that really bothers some readers. Some readers, it makes the book for them. And to be fair, there's nothing out there like it. So you might like it, you might hate it.
Okay, I'll check it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on stylization of dialogue?
What about books that use their own dialects, like Clockwork Orange, or I'm trying to think of another example. Any way to, I guess people really like those books. I find it almost impenetrable. Are there ways to sort of have your cake and eat it too with your own dialect?
Yeah, for sure. And I want to Google really quickly who the writer is. This is a screenwriter that I'm thinking of. It might be multiple credits, so it might be sort of hard to tell exactly who Daniel Waters. Okay. So Daniel Waters talked about this in writing Heathers, which was an 80s teen dark comedy. One of my favorite movies. The idea that he was going for with this movie is that most of the characters are sort of sassy teenagers, right? But he wanted to deliberately distance it from the slang of the era and like the sort of hip dialogue of that time, because he knew that would only date it. And so he kind of creates his own, like, the characters just have such a weird cadence to how they talk. Like, they essentially create their own slang and turns of phrase and things like this that have become iconic. People now quote that movie, and that it's almost a franchise with the Broadway musical and stuff, and a TV pilot and stuff like that. It's so stylized that it just becomes infinitely quotable, but it's also not impenetrable because it all feels sort of like something a teenager would say. It's not like a conlang like Clockwork Orange, where he's creating like an entirely new vocabulary. He's using words that we already use. But I think so that might be part of the key of it, the part of the core to that idea. If you're trying to create a very different dialect, maybe don't make up a bunch of new words. Maybe just use the words that we have and combine them in new ways. And you can occasionally, I mean, what is Mean Girls kind of did the same thing at certain points, didn't they? Stop trying to make fetch happen. Like I don't know, maybe fetch was already something that people were saying at the time. Who knows?
Definitely not.
But it feels connected to that movie. It feels like of that movie. It feels like it comes from that. It could only come from that, to me at least.
Okay, that makes sense.
So yeah, maybe don't go too far out of your way to make up new words or new spellings or things that are hard to pronounce or read or understand. Try to use stuff that is already within grasp of the reader, just using it in a new way. You know, another good example might be I Think You Can Lead, or I Think You Should Lead by Tim Robinson. This sketch show that
cool.
the characters have really, really specific dialogue and communication styles, even the ones that aren't played by Tim. They all feel like they're written by Tim, because they are. Or I think there's a small staff in the show, but they all feel like they're of his kind of voice, even when he's not like the star of a sketch. So a lot of sketches will be there's a social interaction going on and one person's really weird. That's just like the entirety of the I Think You Should Leave kind of ethos. And often it is Tim playing that character, but sometimes it's not. And he's the straight man, and we pick a different character, but it still feels like that kind of dialogue. Characters will say things like, "Are you going to tell anyone that I housed Dylan's entire burger down at Graham's Lorelei Lounge? Like, you housed a burger? Like, what? I've never heard that, but I get what it means. It's a word that I understand. You housed it in your mouth, I guess. Your mouth was inhabited by the burger. Go ahead.
There's an episode of Star Trek that does this, I think, really well. They change words we're familiar with to other words we don't use as often, like someone's gaze is their glimpse. They glimpse the enemy through the trunks rather than the trees. They wrestle their trembles to rages. This kind of dialogue, I think it works really well. It makes their culture feel more alien, but it still feels like we understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, I can tell what that probably means. Even though it's pretty silly and would never be something we say. So yeah, I think you want to have that level of implicit understanding, unless it's like a really alien culture, in which case it's okay if the audience doesn't understand. But if we are intended to understand, then yeah, using a palette that we are more familiar with and just recombining those same words in different ways is probably the way to go. Thank you for the good question there. The opposite is naturalistic dialogue, which mimics everyday speech, but it still needs to be shaped and purposeful. It might include more interruptions and false starts. It may have subtext or it may not. Sometimes small talk is just small talk. It's often used in literary fiction or realist dramas, which realist is a particular mode of writing that emerged in like the late 1700s, mid to late 1700s. And involves trying to showcase life as it actually is. It's kind of weird to think of like realism being a style that had to be developed and is like relatively recent, but realism as a style is relatively recent. For a long time, stories were full of stylization and affectations, and the audience was just more familiar with that. And we were never going in thinking that stories were literally trying to portray things as they actually happened. You want to use naturalistic more often when you want to add that level of realism and emotional authenticity. You may have more quiet, character-driven stories that just feel more realistic overall, and you want them to be full of all the mistakes and people speaking over each other and mishearing each other and all that stuff that just feels more authentic. We just want the audience to sort of forget they're reading dialogue. Maybe you're trying to even imply that a section is a direct transcript or from a tape or something like that. You can also definitely feature sequences in your books that are literally supposed to be transcripts or supposed to be letters that someone's writing or are supposed to be analysis of a video. Like the book The Troop, which I mentioned in class yesterday, every other chapter, there's interstitials where it will be like a transcript from an audio recording or a video or a news broadcast or something like that. So those are often going to feel a bit more naturalistic than the rest of the novelistic dialogue. Okay. what kind of dialogue can we only do in novels and we can't really do in books, or sorry, books or novels, in movies or shows?
You mean spoken dialogue? Because you can do a lot more internal monologue in a book.
Sure. Okay, we can start there. So, sorry, Natasha, we'll tell you just 1 second. So, yeah, you can have pretty much unlimited length of dialogue, either internal or external, in a novel. We'll get tired of external dialogue a little faster, but in terms of that internal dialogue, you can make that a whole chapter of just that if you want. It doesn't necessarily interrupt the flow of the narrative to the same extent that it would in a movie. Go ahead, Natasha.
I was just going to say, like, your whole novel could be essentially a narrator's dialogue, or, the voice of this character.
Yeah, like The Stranger by Camus, or The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Or there's a lot of stories in this sort of storyteller mode. It's a bit old-fashioned, but I mean, Name of the Wind is from like what, 2008 or 9. So there are still some people doing this. It makes it feel a little antiquated in a way. I think Nabokov's Lolita is like this as well, in the form of a deposition from the main character, but he's so sort of well-spoken that it's like you have to have superpowers to be this well-spoken in a deposition in real life. What else? What can we only do in a novel in terms of dialogue? You guys want to hint?
We can sort of reveal that the person is thinking the opposite of what they're saying
Oh,
more
okay.
directly.
So you're saying you can delineate between the thought and the speech to the point where we can assess additional subtext or additional angles to that scene that we wouldn't have gotten at all in a movie or show. Yeah.
Like, oh God, Bob just knocked on the door. Hi, Bob. I'm so happy to see you. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, great point. That in a movie or show that might have to be communicated through body language or performance. But in a novel, you don't have the visual performance. We only have the description of the performance. So you might be able to imply that through all the thoughts around it. Or yeah, that's just a sort of additional layer you always have access to in a book and sort of have to use in a book, or else your book will feel flat. You really have to be using internal and external, with some rare exceptions. What else can we only do in a book? How about conversations that span time? Any ideas on that?
Like summary, like you start a conversation and then you kind of summarize the length and what they talked about.
That is another. I have another slide for that. That is also on there. So maybe we could start with that. The sort of like implied conversation. Is that what you're getting at? Or like
Like,
right. Go ahead.
you could have two characters meet and then, they talk about their plans for the next 4 hours or something. That could just be one little line, or you could actually start the conversation and then just sort of tell us how long and how, they kept talking about these things for the rest of the night while they finished their bourbon or whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay, so two sort of separate ideas here. We'll pick them apart. So first of all, narrative summary. We don't have to actually articulate the dialogue at all. You could just include a couple lines of it here and there, just the highlights from the conversation, and then the rest of it, you just tell us what happened. In a movie, we might be able to replicate that by the sort of like you've seen that shot where like panning away from the restaurant window, and we sort of see them behind the glass, like having a great date or whatever, and we sort of like the music gets louder, we can't hear them. That might be a way that you could replicate that, but it just is not as smooth and easy as it is in a book. We'll look at an example in just a second that does a great job of that. I also want to speak to, but let's just go back to this conversations that span time sort of thing. You maybe heard these sort of stories that are like from our grandparents' generation that are like, I proposed like 35 times and eventually she said yes. And that's why, and that's how I met your grandmother. And we've been together ever since. That kind of conversation might be written in a similar way to one congruent conversation in a book, right? Except you might be able to split it up almost to feel like what we might look at as a montage in a show or movie. You might start with, will you go out with me? He said. No, she said 2 years later. How about now? He said 4 years later on the banks of the Thames River. No, she said in a hot air balloon 500 feet above the ocean. We're sort of like carrying a thread or a type of interaction or like one topic through time. which you can even do between like different speakers. Imagine you can say like, uh, or as long as it sort of feels like it's carrying the same like general thread of that conversation, maybe we have a chapter, I don't know, from the POV of God or something like that. Will you help us? Asked Julius Caesar. Not now, said God. Well, how about now? Asked Gandhi. Nope, still no, said God. Like you can move us through time and space, like however you want in a novel. Like it would feel very challenging to make this work in a movie unless we're sort of we're just like hard cutting from moment to moment. But it might be hard to sort of track that or follow that with the same level of continuity in a movie. So yeah, it's possible in other mediums, but books just have the easiest, most effortless time of doing that. Another one is the non-conversation, which is one that is, you might imagine your characters are burdened by the customs of their era. They say only one sentence to each other, but that sentence carries a deep and resonating feeling that seems to articulate an entire conversation. How much can we do with just looks or just the brush of the hand or things like that, right? You might imagine your character's like, hi, she said. And in that hi, he felt the swell of the ocean. In that hi, he felt the tragedy of their parting. In that hi, he felt not only the distance between them, but the thread that could be pulling them back together. Hey, he said back. You know what I mean? Like that could be it. You can keep it
Hey,
so much beneath the surface in a novel.
hey, with two Y's.
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, girl, what up?
um, I have one from sci-fi that I've seen a few times. This probably comes up in fantasy. You can have, you describe this like, okay, the alien spoke in this incomprehensible language that was like nails, hot nails, like penetrating my brain, and then you can like just write a bunch of crazy symbols,
Sure.
and that can work on a page. It cannot work as well in a movie.
Yeah, and this works great with fantasy too. You see this all the time when it comes to like demons or spirits or monsters speaking. Sometimes it'll be like the demon had a voice like boiling honey or something like that. You're like, what? I guess I see it. I mean, okay. Like it sort of like prose in novels doesn't have to make exact one-to-one sense. One I really liked or a line I really liked from Sleuth by Anthony Schaefer was she had a voice like chilled Lysol. Chilled Lysol? Is that does that taste different from what does Lysol taste
Mm.
like? I don't even know. Like, but it's chilled. Is it on the rocks? Like
I'm
what?
picturing like the matron of some, old New England family or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great. It comes with some sort of feeling, even if it doesn't make
Mhm.
literal sense, which is like an awesome thing you can do in novels. But if an actor for a script was reading that, they might be like, voice like chilled Lysol, what the hell are you doing? Like, am I angry or sad? Like, what are you doing here? Yeah, very different between prose and script. Any other thoughts there?
Victor Hugo is just full of this in Les Miserables, especially with nondescript. Like there's literally chapters and chapters and chapters and chapters of nondescript dialogue in Les Miserables.
And yeah, a lot of the importance is sort of underscored by the narrator in this sort of style, where sometimes he'll be like, a boring scene happened, but here, let me tell you why it wasn't actually boring. Let me tell you why it's connected to everything that we've seen going on so far. Like the sort of uh, Victorian narration styles usually involve the heavy touch of the author who feels sometimes in some cases almost journalistic in the sense that they're like, let me tell you this important story that happened in history. And I've curated all these different sources and I'm going to now explain the connections and the importance of them to you. So yeah, that feels a little like an older style, but can still absolutely work. I was just reading some great omniscient book. I'm trying to remember what it was. Um, I'll have to come back to it. So I think we're not going to look at this entire scene. I just want to kind of touch on this idea of narrative summary first, or like summary of interactions by reading this passage from All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. So we'll use this to transition into subtext. We'll have an exercise. We'll go to questions. Then we'll finish with lab and workshop. Okay, so let's look at the way he transitions from narrative summary into more of a scene pretty seamlessly. He goes from sweeping omniscient tone and kind of like settles in to the voice of the father and the son. So you can transition from summary to dialogue and back within the same scene, and you sometimes need to. I'm just going to read this one out. He met his father in the lobby of the St. Angelus, and they walked up Chadburn Street to the Eagle Cafe and sat in a booth at the back. Some at the table stopped talking when they came in. A few men nodded to his father, and one said his name. The waitress called everybody Doll. She took their orders and flirted with him. His father took out his cigarettes and lit one and put the pack on the table and put his 3rd Infantry Zippo lighter on top of it and leaned back and smoked and looked at him. He told him his uncle Ed Allison had gone up to the preacher after the funeral was said, and shook his hand. The two of them standing there holding onto their hats and leaning 30 degrees into the wind like vaudeville comics while the canvas flapped and raged about them, and the funeral attendants raced over the grounds after the lawn chairs, and he'd leaned into the preacher's face and screamed at him that it was a good thing they held the burial that morning because it was making up this thing could turn off into a real blow before the day was out. Whew. Combination of character voice and omniscient narrator voice. And that must be a particularly antiquated phrasing. After the funeral was said, maybe that's like an older way of saying the funeral was sort of delivered or held. But I hope you see what I mean, that we can transition quite easily from the narrator to the character speaking. Let's watch him zero in on the scene. This is immediately following what we were just reading. I guess I will just read to the end. It's pretty short. All right. It was making up this thing could turn off into a real blow before the day was out. Buddy, when he come back from up in the panhandle, told me one time it quit blowing there and all the chickens fell over. The waitress brought their coffee. Here you go, doll, she said. I'll have your all's orders up in just a minute. She's gone to San Antonio, the boy said. Don't call her she. Mama, I know it. They drank their coffee. No quotation marks in McCarthyian minimalist style. Very little elaboration sometimes, and sometimes he goes into like a whole paragraph of elaboration and explanation of why that was important and what's under the surface. Sometimes he just lets it be. So in this really dense and literary style, you make the rules. Your job is sort of, in your writing literary, is to show us what's possible with language and to prove that it's possible. And then we will learn that lesson from you. So literary is about experimentation and exploration and doing fancy tricks with words. Does that make sense? Hope that all follows how you can move from narration down into a scene and then even kind of crane back up after that if you want to. Any questions on this idea of narrative summary and transitioning into and out of scenes?
Are there other ways to do time breaks, maybe besides just putting a break on the page? During a chapter break or whatever.
You mean in the format or within the text?
I guess both, but mainly I was asking about format.
Okay. So in the format, yeah, a break is the typical way to indicate that some time has passed or that you've reached the end of sort of like a narrative sequence of some kind. Often that is format indicated by 3 asterisks that are placed centered. Besides that, in the format, I don't think there's another way to indicate that time has passed. I don't think there's anything else built into the rules of the format about that. In the text, there's a bunch of different ways to show that time has passed. I think that, or I guess the other main way is to start a new chapter. Maybe that's the other format technique you can use, either the break or the chapter end. And then we might understand that some time has passed in between the chapters, but not always. It's more on the author to tell us, to sort of like make it clear how much time has passed after we do a break or chapter transition.
Or like a little header that's like, 10 years later, colon.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a lot. You can include whatever headers you want. Yeah, absolutely. Or even the time, like certain books that take place in like real-time thriller type scenarios would be like 7:25 p.m. This all happens. 7:26 p.m. This happens. You can do that. No rule against it. But yeah, I think that's it in terms of the format. Either you make up your own thing, use a break, and use a new chapter. Also, just a new paragraph can imply that some time has passed. Like it sort of resets us in terms of the thought or the idea. So tells us that we're moving into a new idea. You can move through quite a bit of time within one continuous page where we don't even do any breaks at all. It might just be harder to keep track of that. Like that's what breaks are helpful for, is like making sure the reader's oriented. It's more for the reader. Well, everything we're writing is for the reader, but go ahead.
I've done paragraph breaks that skip significant chunks of time. Yeah.
And I think,
Okay.
I mean, you can always if you're just in your manuscript, you can just space between the paragraphs without putting any punctuation between them. But I think that's technically not in the manuscript format. And in editing, they would add the asterisks in to indicate a break there.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% on that, though. That may actually also be different from country to country and like from publication guide to publication guide.
I mean, some novels just put a big gap on the page, but I
Yeah.
guess in manuscript form they would use the asterisk.
Yeah.
The only problem with doing that is sometimes it comes at like on a page break,
Right.
can maybe throw it off.
Yeah, this is all really the typesetters. And if you're trad publishing, this should be out of your hands. If you're self-publishing, you do have to really worry about that stuff. So that's like a big reason that people like traditional publishing. You don't have to typeset or layout or do any of that stuff. Okay. Let's talk a little on subtext and how to improve. We'll go into our exercise, then go right into questions. So how do we manage subtext? We're talking about the emotion, intention, or the meaning that is underneath the words. So whatever is not being said by the characters. Or it could be the opposite, where they are saying what they well, actually, I guess it couldn't really be the opposite. So the interiority of your characters is reflecting one thing, whereas the exterior is reflecting something else. Those are the situations where subtext might be at play. There isn't always really strong subtext. Sometimes characters are just saying exactly what they mean. Sometimes you need to say exactly what you mean. But most interaction is not exactly direct. You know, the way that just people are, we are sort of using suggestion so as to sound to cause less conflict or to create less of a problem, sometimes to smooth it over and make sure that the interaction is going to go our way. We're going to pick our communication style accordingly. From culture to culture, this is really different how people manage this. Ideas about how direct you should be in stating what you want are going to be drastically different depending on when and where you are in the world. Subtext may be a big part of interaction, or maybe like even the primary aspect of interaction, or in certain cultures, it's considered rude to not say what you mean. So you have to kind of be aware of that and like aware of how your specific characters communicate, even within the culture. We could say, for instance, German culture is considered very direct and to the point. I've been to Germany many times. I speak German pretty well. I can speak to this one at least. And kind of beating around the bush is seen as you're wasting time. Whereas Japanese culture, which I also am pretty familiar with, been to Japan a bunch of times, speak Japanese okay, not great anymore, vary based on implication and subtext, and different levels of politeness and different social situations which require you to use subtext differently. Maybe Nacho can speak to this a little bit more than I can. He's fluent in Japanese. The versatility of words like chotto. Oh my gosh. What does chotto actually mean, Nacho?
Yeah, it can mean a lot, just depending on the context. I mean, it means just a little bit, but it could be, you know, that's, you know, it could mean I don't quite understand. It could mean like that's a little bit impossible, right? Or, you know, that's not possible. Or it could mean like what the hell is wrong with you? Get the hell out of my face.
Yeah.
You know,
it can mean no as well. It can just mean no.
Yeah.
It's the implication of it is, well, in dictionary form it means a little, but the sort of suggested, like the parentheses that you would add would be, there's a little bit of a problem with that, is what you're sort of saying. So if somebody invites you to do
Yes
something.
can also mean no.
Oh yeah. Can you explain further how that works?
Like, you know, I mean, in some ways it's just, you know, when you ask like a negative question, you know, like in English, it's pretty clear, like, you know, so you don't want to go there. Yes. But, you know, like but just beyond that, just the level of like avoiding, you know, conflict or confrontation, someone might actually agree to something that they don't want to do or don't plan to do.
Yeah. Which is not just a cultural, that obviously crosses every culture. People do that no matter where you are. It's kind of annoying when they agree to do something that they don't really want to do and then have to cancel later. But you can see how that might be built into certain interaction styles, to the point where within certain cultural contexts, we understand that they're saying no, even by saying yes sometimes. Or certain cultures that have the gift giving and like accepting thing built in, where you're supposed to offer it, or you're supposed to reject it multiple times, and then finally you're like, okay, fine, I guess I'll take the gift. But to not do that would be rude. So you have to sort of understand the culture and place that you're writing in. Of course, we've stated that too much. But also, these are things that are maybe like evinced by or like brought to the surface by cultural differences, but are different forms of this show up all the time. You can think of how just saying like, there's a bit of a problem with that. Might just be your character's way of saying no to something. Go ahead.
What what you mentioned about people sort of like refusing something, there were actually like massive complaints from Iranian linguists that ChatGPT's Iranian translation was telling people the wrong thing when, let's say, a taxi driver was saying, no, you know, you're supposed to say, no, I insist you take this money like 3 times or something. And just like a cultural thing that they had to incorporate somehow into the language model of the, AI.
Wow, that's complex. I'd like to know more about that. That's cool. So yeah, it's tough to balance all these things. Human communication is complicated, but sometimes it's absurdly simple. You know, like that's part of what's so complicated about it. Sometimes it's not. Well, what a great way to wrap up the class. Human interaction is complicated. The end. How do we improve at this? So you can try recording and writing out conversations and maybe adjusting them to make them more dramatic or interesting, and ask like, okay, how would characters in a book communicate that? How would I write that interaction from that police body cam video I just watched that would not be annoying to read on the page? How can I summarize just enough of that I get the right idea from it, and enough information and exposition and all the important stuff without overburdening the reader with too many lines, too many repetitive lines, or characters just talking in circles, and we're trying to cut out all the annoying parts of interaction and just include the highlights. What else? You can try transcribing dialogue from other media, like from books or video games or anime, whatever you want, into script format, and just determine what works and adjust that accordingly. Ultimately, don't expect to get all your dialogue exactly right on the first pass. It's okay if some of it is a placeholder or a stand-in, or you're just not totally sure of the phrasing, and you can always come back either after your alpha readers are done or after your own first pass is done, and you can make adjustments in post. But you have to read a lot of books and also other things. I would recommend plays if you really want to get a good grasp of dialogue, but screenplays are also a great place to go. All right. Let's do our exercise for today, and we'll open it to questions in lab. So let's get oh gosh, I hope we can pull this one off. I'm trying to always do new exercises, so you never know what's going to work. My idea was you'd pick either a character or the conflict, then you have 5 lines of dialogue. But then again, now that I'm thinking of it, maybe this will take too long and we won't actually get to questions in lab. What do you think, Nacho? Should we come back to this later and not do the exercise now? Because even writing 5 lines could take easily like 20 minutes. Okay, let's just go to questions in lab first, and if we don't have too much of that, then we can do our exercise. Let's start with questions. Anything you guys want to ask about before we open it up?
So go ahead, Luke. You
have
had a question from me.
I have one about like just formatting. Want to make sure I'm doing it right. So you have characters having a conversation and also doing actions. You basically just put the action they do on the dialogue line and then kind of alternate, right?
Yeah. So that you can kind of imagine it like every time you space down to a new line, it's like, the shot reverse shot thing in a conversation. So in a movie.
Yeah.
So every time you space down, it's like we flip around to the other character's shoulder. And so now if there's a new action that the other character takes, you'll want to have it on the next line down. So yeah, every time you switch either the character that's acting or speaking, you indent onto a new paragraph. If you you typically want to group it though. So if your character does and says some stuff, then you include that all in one paragraph. And then when we go down to a new paragraph, we're imagining we're flipping to the other speaker. So it can get confusing if you're like, I want to have the character do something else and then something else, but you're still spacing down to new paragraphs. That can sometimes make it seem like you're flipping back and forth between the speakers. So something to watch out for. But yeah, the actions should they should go on the dialogue line.
Yeah, I think maybe I've just been stuck in screenplay mode for too long. It's starting to novel writing dialogue in particular is making less sense formatting wise, but that makes sense. I think I'm doing
Okay.
it right.
Yeah, you're probably doing fine. I may have just over-explained it and made it sound more complicated.
No, it's perfectly clear.
Thanks for that question. Other questions?
Um, so yeah, this slide in particular, so, you know, I wonder like what your opinion of this kind of style is, because like a lot of my writing actually looks like this, but I'm not satisfied with it. I feel like, it looked so sad and wistful is just, telling but not showing. And then I feel like, the narration is so sparse that I'm almost like missing an opportunity to involve the reader a little bit more.
Okay, that's a good question. So to answer your question, this is one of my favorite authors. So I love the style. Um, you need to balance it. Like some scenes you need more kind of interiority. Some scenes you have to let the dialogue just stand on its own, or else it's going to feel like a drag to read. If every conversation is like full of interiority and emotion and thoughts and connections and digressions and all these other things, it's not really going to feel like we're in that immersive moment with the characters. You have to like find the right times to do that and the times to pull that away. That's actually a big problem with newer writers, is that they think they have to go too far into including too much stuff around the dialogue. You have to like let it stand on its own a lot of the time. Like that's the reader does a lot of the lifting in their mind, and it's so much easier to read conversations with less of that stuff burdening them, less text. So more white space, more paragraph breaks, shorter lines, simpler lines. A lot of that will really help you. And then sometimes there will be a scene that you want to go into a lot of detail. Sometimes it really matters. Sometimes you want to take a little more detail and have the reader like soak and immerse in that conversation and everything that it means and everything that it implies and everything the characters are thinking and feeling at that time. But if it's like a routine situation for the characters, if it's like a moment where the interaction needs to be the point of the scene, not everything interior, then yeah, let the dialogue stand.
Yeah, I kind of compare it to like, so this is what my notes usually look like, and then I compare it to Jane Austen, where there's a lot more interiority, and I just feel like the character is much more tangible and real.
Okay. You might just like that style more. That's okay.
Okay.
You can appreciate that style more.
Okay.
It's not that right. It's not that that makes better writing. It's not that Jane Austen is like the author that we all aspire to write like. That's a very specific affectation, and like it is considered dense and antiquated by modern standards. Does that mean it's bad or good? No, it just means it is dense and older. You can write like that. You can like evoke that in your own writing, or you can try to imitate that in your own writing. You can do either one. But a lot of the time, we're trying to find this sort of balance between all our influences and inspirations. And somewhere in between them will be like the best version of our own writing. But the best version of your writing is not writing just like someone else.
Okay. Okay. And so, if my interest was like transitioning more towards like a style that's more, I guess maybe considered outdated, but like what would you say is the main thing that's like missing, like different between those two styles?
Sure. And I would say antiquated, not outdated, because outdated sounds like we don't need it anymore. But antiquated to me is like it's older. It just is. So the major difference between sort of Victorian and modern prose styles is one, your character's awareness and articulation of emotion, which is just monumentally more complicated in anything you read from between the years 1800 to 1900. Like the characters have a stronger understanding of what they're feeling and why they're feeling it, and they have words for all those emotions. And it feels more like the character is sort of like able to fully process and understand everything, even if they in the scene they're in grief or anger or something like that, they still feel distant from it. Whereas you might imagine a modern book where a character is just really, really angry and we are in close third person with them. We might have chapter 15. The character just goes, ah, arg, 100 A's and 100 R's and 100 G's and 100 H's in a row, period. That is sort of reflecting their interiority without processing or understanding it. So I think it's like that level of distance and that kind of clinical analysis that makes it something feel more in the antiquated style where characters being in the moment not being able to fully articulate everything they're feeling, but we sort of just like are experiencing it alongside them. That is sort of seen as the modern way to do it. But it's not like one is wrong or one is right.
Got it. Got it. Okay. She is kind of like a genius of being able to like really render those emotions. And so I do struggle with that. I guess I have to like read a clinical psychologist or something to get at that level, but
You may not.
that's helpful. Thank you.
She wasn't a psychologist, was she? So it's like you don't have to. And a lot of these classic books that we're reading are written by very young people, by the way, too. So like Frankenstein was written by an 18-year-old, just to keep it in perspective. So you don't have to be an expert to write like that. I will say though that what do I want to say? I think I already wrapped up. We wrapped this one up, didn't we? What else was I saying? That's it. Okay. Thank you for the great topic in question. I clearly can't articulate anything. So I would be a terrible Jane Austen character. All right, thank you for that. Any other questions that you guys want to dive into on dialogue?
Avoiding clinical dialogue when describing a traditionally clinical topic, i.e. the law or philosophy, while still maintaining some type of expertise. I.e. if you're trying to explain something that is traditionally difficult, but not trying to bore people to death, and still trying to make it understandable, what do you do?
Good questions. Your characters have feelings and emotions which will affect even professional circumstances. If they're talking about lawyer and law stuff, you have a character that's tired and stressed out. Well, you can use that to inform the scene and create a bit of tension there, to create a bit of something else to be watching for. We talked about how all these scenes are often doing more than one thing. Like good dialogue is not only advancing the plot forward, but we're also showing who the characters are. You also want to find like their specific delivery style. 5 lawyers have 5 very different ways of arguing cases. Some they might utilize different rhetorical techniques. Some might use body language differently. Some might be more theatrical, whereas some are more brass tacks and down to earth, right? So I think finding the nuance and the specificity in how your character actually delivers what is going on professionally in that sequence is one way to do this. The other way to do this is you increase the tension and conflict. So make them more involved, make them more personally involved in what's going on. We're not just investigating a murder. I'm investigating the murder of, I don't know, my child. That's going to be a lot more emotionally driven, obviously, to the point where most lawyers would be expected to recuse themselves from that, right? You're too emotional. You can't be involved in that case. You can also skip the boring parts, summarize the boring parts, get right to the good parts. You can say the trial was going totally well until this guy took the stand, and therefore, we just skip like days or weeks or months of legal procedure to get right to the good part. It's like the Princess Bride style. You know how Princess Bride has a narrator that's like the grandpa that he's like, oh, this part's boring. Forget that part. Let's just go to the next part. When I was a kid, I never understood why grandpa needed to be in Princess Bride, but now as an adult, I get it. It's to get to just the good parts. He can say, and then they spent a long time in that part, and this is the boring. Oh, you don't want to read that. And we just get to the good stuff. So you can do that. You can summarize until you get to the exact moments that you want to sort of put on stage and allow those to be the most dramatic, impactful, meaningful moments. The last thing you can do is include your character's interiority to the point where that may even sort of become the more important aspect of the scene. We're investigating a crime scene, your character's making professional talk with the other crime scene investigators. Maybe we just stop writing that dialogue at all, have it kind of trail off, right? He continued discussing the ins and outs of the case, but here's what was really going on. He could now see exactly what has happened, and he recreated the scene in his mind. So you're doing something more interesting with the prose than the professional proceedings would be. You can even like imagine how you might do it in a movie. I really love this movie, Third Period Mystery, which is this Korean mystery thriller from like 2007 or 8 that nobody saw but me. When it's about 2 kids that are investigating a murder in their high school during one period where everyone's out of school. So they only have like an hour to solve it. It's like 24 with like an Agatha Christie type element. It's actually awesome. But when the characters get to a crime scene, not only do they talk about what they think happened there, but they sort of like reconstruct the events around them. Shows like Sherlock and stuff like this do this as well, where like you'll see the people doing the crimes, or like when they do it in the movie, they show the crime happening in black and white while the characters are in color. They're like pointing things out. They're like, I think he stabbed here. I think one bullet casing fell there. You can do stuff like that in a book too. You can say he summoned up a recreation of the events in his mind and he watched it playing out. So you can use that sort of like additional kind of novelistic conceits to create a more interesting scenario than what's really literally going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, Criminal Minds did a similar thing in the earlier seasons of the show, too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. A lot of crime shows do stuff like this, don't they? I think Hannibal does this too, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Well, Will is like, he imagines himself as the killer, which is kind of a cool way of doing it. He'll be like, I walk into the kitchen and I pull the trigger. This is my design. He sort of imagines, like, what if I were the one doing the crime? That could be a really compelling way to showcase a scene like that. So you can think of, what if we have a conversation with two characters that are talking about, I don't know, what Tupperware should we bring to the potluck? But you envision it as a sword fight between them, where they're stabbing each other with these sentences. They're impaling each other on their turns of phrase. Like you sort of just use your imagination and the style of books to create a more interesting scene. Maybe that's a dumb example of the potluck sword fight.
No, I'm just imagining like them using the lids as the sword.
Sure, sure. Maybe that's a little far, but you get the principle, I hope.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at Open Lab. Does anybody have like a log line, a character introduction, a paragraph or two, something they want to get feedback on or ask about? We can still leave it open for questions too, of course, but we'll open it to lab stuff as well.
Dakota posted one in chat.
Okay. Do you want to read it out for us?
Sure, yeah, this is a character intro. High Administrator Joran was a walking prune, a decrepit imp with ill regard for human kindness. Wrinkles upon wrinkles under his bloodshot, sunken eyes from little sleep, the man was dead from work and dead from age. Purple robes draped over him like fine curtains swallowed as a long trail followed like a manipulative peacock. His worn boots scraped the stone floor as he braced himself on a chair. A brief catch of the breath, a labored, asthmatic wheeze. He was 52, but his body was the ancient age of a tortoise.
Well done. Okay, this is good. Maybe a bit of a, I think you caught it yourself, but kind of a typo in the middle
Yeah.
portion there. Okay, you found it. Nice
Yeah.
job. So I like with this how you started with this sort of overall impression of someone, then you've given details to back it up. So you start with, he is a walking prune. Let me tell you about that. And so that can be a nice way to do a character introduction. Start with sort of like the first impression, then support the first impression with additional details until we end with like something evocative and memorable that reinforces what we just said. So nice technique there. And I also like how you can occasionally break from, like, I often say in a screenplay, subject, verb, direct object is the correct way to write almost every sentence. In a novel, it doesn't have to be. You can include fragments. A brief catch of the breath is not a complete sentence. That's okay. There's no verb there, right? We don't need one. Like sometimes grammatically incorrect sentences can stand as punchy lines that will kind of like blend into a longer, if everything else is grammatically correct, then a couple fragments here and there can work fine and they can support the rhythm of that syntax. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, anyone else want to share something, ask a question, give feedback on anything?
Throw one.
Okay.
Might want to make this more personal because we're introducing the main character's dad in his like early childhood, so I might want to add more emotion or like connection or voice to it. Anyway, I posted it in chat.
Okay, do you want to read it too?
Henroy Conrad peered through a tiny tripod lens like a surgeon. The gunsmith was bristled, burly, and bear-like. His overbroad shoulders blended into his lack of neck behind a wild, dark beard. Two giant hands tightened a miniature spring with a steel hook.
All right, thanks for that. I see what you're getting at in terms of maybe include a bit more like opinion of the character if this is from like a close third POV of a character talking about you said it was his father?
Yeah,
I see.
I think that the first chapter should probably be closer POV.
That would make sense. But a lot of this is pretty visually clear, at least. You know, bristled, burly, and bear-like. I think that's a good overall shaped or impression of the character that you then fill out a little bit
And
with
this
more
is
details.
actually before we introduce our main character, so maybe it works. We introduce our main character as his son, like in the next description.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, that can work fine. There's no need to, you don't have to introduce your protagonist first, especially in a book. And then he's in the middle of an action as well. Two giant hands tightening a miniature spring. So having your character actually doing something when we meet them often is a good excuse to have them do something that sort of tells us who they are. Like it stands in for who they are somehow. That's not always going to be the case, but that's just sort of like a conceit of fiction. The first thing we see a character doing, we understand as like, that's kind of who they are. In real life, it's not
yeah,
like
he's
that at all.
constant.
By the way, that's one of the big differences between real life and fiction. You can catch someone in an off day in real life really easily, but in fiction, it's like, no, their first impression of them tells us something.
So we open on a gun, or rather a gun's parts on a table, and then we move to the father, then the son, and then it gets a little bit closer and more personal. Goes from there.
Okay, that can work. Yeah, some books start with more of a far out view and then they kind of zoom in. Wheel of Time usually would start in omniscient in every chapter and then kind of crane down until it finds a third limited character to inhabit. So yeah, different POVs like that can work fine.
Okay. Hopefully it works. I'll just leave it alone for now. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I maybe wouldn't do it in every chapter, but if it's just at the start and that's like, we understand that we're going in from the general and from the far away and we're zooming in, finding a point of focus, and then we stick with that point of focus, then I think that can work well. Of course, you can find a different point of focus later, but as long as you're not every chapter starting really far away, there's not necessarily a need to.
It's gonna follow him in every chapter.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for sharing this. We are at the end of our time for today. Thank you everybody for coming by. We have another brand new class next Friday on writing found footage movies, found footage features. So that'll naturally have a bit more of a focus on horror thriller because most found footage movies are horror thrillers with very rare exceptions. Maybe you guys can think of some exceptions. We'll touch on them, but largely it is a horror thriller genre. That will be Friday from 6 to 8. And in the upcoming Sunday sessions, we're going to have some one-offs related to TV writing. So we're doing a TV scene work class tomorrow. And then we haven't announced it yet, but we'll have another event next Sunday in that same time slot that will again be linked to TV. More information on that soon. We also are announcing our in-person LA event at the end of this month, October 26th from 12 noon to 6:30, or maybe 6, I think 6:30, at the Boyle Arts Conservatory downtown, Cesar Chavez Avenue. We are going to have a 6-hour event where you're going to go all the way from idea to finished outline of a new horror feature. So it's a horror writing Halloween event. Should be really fun. We'll have some light snackies and things like that, but it's mostly going to be, it's not going to be fully catered. So we'll have a lunch break. But come by for that. It's open to everybody. We are looking for people to RSVP beforehand if they can, just so we don't have a bunch of, I don't know, murderers come join us or whatever. Or if they do, at least they're murderers who have RSVP'd at the very least. It's only polite. This is in Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory, Cesar Chavez Avenue, downtown LA, October 26th at 12 to 6:30. Hope to see you guys there. We'll have an email that we're sending out about that soon. We're going to have an RSVP sheet for that soon, but we just want to let you know about that now because we just lined up everything. We're going to have like a projector screen and a bunch of tables and it's, well, that's not that exciting, but it's exciting to me. Okay, so hope to see you guys there and have a bunch of great new horror outlines to be working on for this October. After that, I'm writing a horror movie myself this October, hoping to finish around Halloween. Okie doke. Any last thoughts or comments, questions before we wrap up for today? Okay, if not, we'll wrap up. Lots of events happening on the weekend. Check your events tab. And later today, lab from 4 to 6 p.m. And tomorrow, I'm running that TV scene work class from 11 to 1. All right, thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.